Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Jim and Rob Over-Analyze Movies, the live video podcast for people who are looking for a deeper conversation about the films we watch today. And today, we've got another banger for you. Denis Villeneuve's latest big screen epic. That's right, everyone. Dune 2. And let's just get going here, everybody. Let me get that out of the way and bring on my co-host with the most, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jim Chaboyko. How are you doing, my friend?
Good. Thank you.
You're not even muted.
Klaatu Barada Nikto, as they say in space. Different movie, but anyhow.
Jim, I owe us a see it or skip it on this. I have not put it out yet. So, but we are not going to do see it or skip it for tonight. Is there anything before we get into this flick? Is there anything outside of Dune 2 you wanted to chat about?
Well, I have with the cooperation of my wife, been watching the documentary shorts that are up for Best Oscar, and there's a bunch of them on YouTube, and they're actually really good. Very interesting. I've watched 3 out of the 5 now. I'm not sure if the other 2 are on YouTube, but yeah, the Barber of Little Rock, Island in Between, and was the Last Repair Shop. And they're all very detailed, shining a light on certain corners of the world. And I highly advise. They're not long. If maybe don't watch Forensic Files again and take a look at this one, and you'll be handsomely rewarded. They're the first 3 that I've watched are super good, really interesting. So.
Well, what I'll do, folks, is Jim and I will work on it, and we'll get those pinned on the first comment of tonight's show. And also, speaking of pinning, somewhere about here, I will put the see it or skip it once I finally put it up. That was very much our first night's reaction. My feelings, Jim, have evolved since then.
Okay, that's good. I mean, it's interesting to see the progression. I mean,
yeah, no. I get it. I don't feel like you're patronizing me. Not at all. All right. Let's jump into, dare I say it?
The spoiler zone.
Whoa. That's like a Harkonnen spoiler zone.
Yeah,
you should be black and white one. You're gonna have the fire blurks.
Right? Yes. But folks, we are going to be tonight. We are looking at Dune 2, Denis Villeneuve's part 2 of what I suspect will be a 3-parter. This is the one where we have Paul Atreides forced underground with his Fremen allies, fights both his sworn enemies, the Harkonnens, and the Emperor of the Known Universe. Quite the title there, Jim? To avenge his father and regain his noble birthright. You comfortable with that? That's a reasonable capture of the flick.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. I do want to give a qualifier to everyone when we're talking about spoiler zone today. You know what? Just be warned, folks. It's not just about this movie. I will be speculating about what will happen in the 3rd movie. Villeneuve has said he wants to make a 3rd. It'll probably happen. I'm going to be speculating on that based on my knowledge of Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and God Emperor of Dune. The three other books that Frank Herbert wrote as part of this larger Dune narrative, the story of Arrakis. And so, yeah, if that's not your jam, folks, time to move along. Otherwise, get ready for the ride. And of course, I say to anyone in the chat, speaking of which, do we have anyone in the chat? We had a couple lurkers,
apparently.
I think. Anyway, folks, I say, yeah, you know what? Chime in, and we will. We'd love to hear what you think. Jim, is it a fair capture to say you were a pretty enthusiastic see it the night after we watched it? I was a more reserved see it. I had some problems, shall we say. That a fair assessment?
Yeah.
My feelings have evolved. They have not gotten more positive, although they still haven't. I still haven't dipped into skip it territory, and I don't think I will. What about you? How have has your opinion changed to this flick since we saw it the night of?
You know, it's funny after watching that one. Anytime you comment on something, it's like, oh, I should have watched the first one sooner than I saw the second one, and oh, I should have watched the original, and should have read the book, and should have watched Jodorowsky's Dune, or and all the DVD extras on the first whatever.
Why didn't you study, Jim?
Yeah, exactly.
You disappointed your teacher.
Sort of go overboard on this kind of stuff, but no, my opinion's still the same. I'm quite enthusiastic. The trickiness here is that it's a big water cooler movie, I think. It did huge at the box office. My son was and his girlfriend were very interested in going to it. They went before we did. They saw the first show Thursday night, which was technically opening night. And so, it's when you say it's hard to actually say skip it to something so big, although that didn't get in the way of our judgment of Avatar, the latest Avatar movie.
And that's a movie that'll come up tonight.
Oh, will it? Okay.
Okay. Anyway, sorry, go back.
But having said that, it's nice to see. It's nice to have a big hit that everybody that has a certain degree of complexity that so many people go to see. I mean, you can see how it goes through the cult. I was sort of disappointed that there was no reference to it on Saturday Night Live this week, but give it a couple weeks. But you see little things on Twitter, you see other things too. You hear little jokes or references, and so it's sort of nice to have that again, like a big movie that people coalesce around. Whether they like it or not. Yeah, that's kind of the fun thing about a blockbuster is that, it becomes water cooler talk. Yeah.
Well, much like, Barbie, Oppenheimer, and the whole Barbenheimer thing. That was one of the funnest chats we had, even just saying, is it hype? What is the deal?
Yeah.
That was a great conversation we had back last summer. And there were two interesting films. I was less enamored of one as I was of the other, but I could understand what you're talking about, that cultural touchstone, even if it's only for the season.
Yeah.
Let's start. I do have a couple of questions, Jim.
Sure.
And I think we talked about it briefly in the Digital Green Room before we got the show started. I would say what was in the novel and in the first movie, it's coming of age. Would you call it a political thriller? Maybe not a thriller, but there's that kind of more, say, slice of life, the political story, coming of age, vengeance, and, the ideas of destiny. I think that's sort of and really the emotional story is what choices does this young man, what kind of man is he going to be? Is he going to follow that path of vengeance? Is he going to follow the path of power? And he makes certain choices in the novel. Whereas here, I would argue it seems more to me that this is more of a romance. It's still a coming of age. Some of those themes, some of those emotional kind of story ideas, you know, avenging the father, taking your rightful place, that sort of stuff is still there, but it's very much wrapped up in a romance now between him and Chani, so ably played by Zendaya. Here's the thing. It does make the choice clearer. It becomes more a choice between, am I going to follow my mother and her ways, or the ways of my communist girlfriend? Okay, or maybe more of a nationalist revolutionary girlfriend. What do you think of that? Have I captured that correctly? Does that vibe with the way you saw the film? Or is there an emotional kind of storyline there that I'm missing?
No, I think it is quite different. I remember reading the book as a teenager, well, a young teenager, and it was probably a little bit. I was probably a bit young for it. I might have been 12, I think. And while I did get some points, you know, the appreciation level is maybe not where it should have been. I found the novel to be very cold back when I read it the first time. Almost, you know, you go from reading Tolkien, which is sort of, which has its own, you know, existential qualities, but they're wrapped up in family and village and all that kind of thing. And ultimately, I think, you know, friendship, and, you know, these are sort of the cornerstones of that story. This one is you know, sort of like trust no one. This is everyone's got an ulterior motive, that kind of thing, and
everybody's got an agenda.
And the thing that impressed me, and you know, later on when I read 1984 too, was just the sort of the complete lack of nostalgia is not the right word, but that sort of it was there was a coldness to it, and I really, it sounds like like I'm being negative, but it was actually kind of refreshing, because most of the things that we consumed when we were that age had a sort of a hopefulness and a warmth and that kind of thing. But when you read these things, they're pretty cold little books, and well, not little, but they're pretty cold big books. And so, you know, if you go more into the romance route, first of all, that's kind of the traditional Hollywood rubric that you can disguise in a lot of ways. But it also, there's an element that you can latch onto. I mean, who wasn't, I was personally charmed with that sort of journey in the desert and them sitting on top of the dune when I think maybe they had their first kiss, and, you know, the sort of the talk between them, and, you know, you said, I want to be equal to you, and you could sort of see her melt a little bit. You know, that was very well handled, and a very human moment in a very, very, I guess, a story just filled with conflict. So yeah.
I wonder, I got to circle back to your, maybe the age you read it. I know I remember when I read Dune Messiah, what you could argue is really part 3 of the arc of the story of Paul Atreides. And his, what I would argue, that's kind of the story of his fall in Paul, in Dune Messiah. I'm wondering if both of us, because I read it around the same age, I think it was, you know, one of those books we passed around, or passed our knowledge of around. Oh, you got to read this, you got to read that. We all kind of ended up reading the same thing. And maybe tragic heroes and cautionary tales, unless they were super obvious, and you mentioned 1984, that was not something, if it was in any way subtle, that wasn't necessarily something we would pick up on. Whereas I think as an adult, as I read it, you can sort of see where it's going. You know, you sort of go, oh, sorry, but Paul's turning into a bit of a here over the arc of the whole story. You know, that he's getting colder, more of a bastard, and and not so much. Yeah, that's a tough thing for a youth to do. Which, circling back, I think that can almost answer the question, why a romance? Why boil it down to a romance? But I got to admit, I'm wondering if part of it is that Hollywood doesn't do tragedy well. Because I don't think we're getting set up for a tragic fall. I don't think this story ends where Paul looks a little dark.
Yeah.
But you got his wife, his love, the love of his life, running away at the end of the film, and it's like, yeah, that's a great hook into the third movie, and him chasing. He has foreseen it. How is that going to play out? I will go see the third movie, but I have even more concerns. I'm not sure where there's a question in that, Jim.
No, it's a good point. I mean,
go ahead.
Another, just to sort of just elaborate a little bit on it, when you engage in a story you may not be equipped for, whether it's because of age or you're not expecting it, or you're, it's from a different part of the world. These are good things, I think, is that the first time I read Dune, they would introduce a character and then kill them off. I was like, what? I thought we were being set up for this guy to follow him along. And no, that didn't happen. The same thing with, 1984. I thought it was quite a thing that he wanted his Winston Smith wanted his girlfriend to be as promiscuous as possible, which goes against every American story that I'd ever read up until that point. And then, later on, you're watching Miyazaki animation films, and there's an evil witch in the first act, and then she turns good at the end of the first act, and you're like, well, where does the story go from here? So these are sort of good things, and I think it's interesting to follow. So hopefully Villeneuve will take some of what Herbert laid down, and we'll have the courage to sort of disregard the notes from 20-year-old producers and or whatever. And
because it's certainly, to me, Jim, that is one of my, let's say, my problems with this film. This is the point where he should be on top of it all. He's got the girl, he's got the power, he has the money, he has the women.
Yeah.
And even the choice, like, it kind of shows him taking on this mantle of the Kwisatz Haderach, not so much out of revenge, as much as, they've attacked Sietch Tabor. You know what? They'll wipe all the Fremen out if I don't do something. That he's taken on this thing that he doesn't want to because of the circumstances. Whereas, it's interesting, even though he ends in the novel with all this stuff. He's got his wife. He's got the wife that he needs to take power, but he still has Chani. He has the Fremen. He's avenged his father. He's done it all. But all the people around him are suffering. Mm-hmm. His mother is frightened of him. His mentor, Stilgar, has been, lessened into more of a worshiper, because now it's like, oh my goodness, he really is the Elizan al-Gaib. Mm-hmm. Chani is, I get it, whatever you need, if I must go.
Yeah.
And that's like, there is the beginning of the fall of a tragic figure. The man who, and also kind of going to that theme that Herbert wrote about, was beware the charismatic hero. Mm-hmm. That Atreides is kind of a curse on the Fremen, an undeserved curse. Like,
I
don't know. What do you see? Do you see any hope for that vision in this film?
Yeah, how do you end something like that? Like, how do you end a trilogy? You know, trilogies. Am I wrong? Do they always end up with a medals award or something, or like a
Well, but this
dance?
is why this is so obviously this end of part 2.
Yeah.
Where if he's more of a classic hero, this would be, oh, it's all looking pretty crappy. Think the end of oh, that movie involves wars in the stars. The end of Empire Strikes Back, where he gets this shocking information. He's lost a body part.
Yeah. Yeah.
His friends have been scattered to the four winds. Everything just sucks.
Yeah.
And that's the moment where all is lost and what are we going to do? Whereas at the end of Dune, the novel, and we kind of have that here. If it's like oh no, you see all the problems, but he has everything.
Yeah.
Like that he is victorious, but there are problems. And it is so important, I think, for that tragic one that they have maximum agency. And I think in this film, a lot of his agency isn't there. It's the Fremen are kind of portrayed as these fundamentalist bumpkins, weak, easy to manipulate. The
good fighters.
Good fighters, great cannon fodder, that it's the circumstances, his scheming mother is the one that puts him in this terrible position to make this choice where, that does not make a tragic hero. That makes, the mother the villain. Like, really? As you said in the theater once.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, folks, this is only a paraphrase of Jim in the theater. Mother-in-laws.
That's great, Johnny. I can't believe. You may ask how I ended up here, but and then I saw a piece online. I didn't read it. I just sort of skimmed it a little bit. But the scene that Frank Herbert wanted in both movies, and it was some sort of dinner scene. And I thought, oh God, no, I can't imagine. Just if there's a dinner scene in a movie, it's not gonna probably go very well. And this one would be very tense. It would ratchet up the tension even more. But yeah, I don't know. You compare it to other sort of multi-movie franchises, and you have to think of how would you how would you end it? Would you end it like, almost like a Shakespeare play, or
Well,
they like to end on a sign of hopefulness. Unless you're looking at something like Don't Look Up
but this is
which is a singular, standalone movie. But
this is the thing. It does end on a sign of hope. Chani runs away.
Yeah.
So although Paul may be not the man that she dreamed of, there's this idea that, he can become if he chases after, oh, baby, please forgive me.
There's a scene
Which
where he
I
runs.
think is lame.
You need him to run through the Dune airport before she gets on her flight.
Who knows? Maybe she becomes part of an internal resistance fighting him. You weren't the man I fell in love with. Which, I gotta admit, it's like that takes away something. First of all, it reduces the central hero by kind of taking away agency. That isn't to say, and this comes back to my question, the first question I thought of, Jim. I mean, notwithstanding her remarkable performance, a lot of that comes down to she was given stuff to do and stuff to work with. And I'm wondering if giving her that stuff to do and stuff to work with did it actually help the story?
You know, the one thing I'll say is that when there was the big scene when Paul is sort of finally addressing everyone in that big cavern, and sort of rallying the
When they
troops,
want him to kill Stilgar because they have their
Yeah.
rules and their way.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you're not allowed to speak unless you're, you know, some kind of leader and that kind of thing. And she sort of blurts out, you know, like, this is BS. And normally in a role like that, if somebody's sort of outspoken, you run the danger of making them seem sort of just like an irritating, you know, outspoken. But she wasn't. Like, she fully believed in it. Like, she came across as genuinely thinking, like, being not just a devil's advocate, but maybe the you know, the dangerous position of being the conscience of the group, you know, which never ends well for the conscience of the group.
No.
See Walking Dead, but you know, it's sort of a great moment for her. I think in lesser hands, or, you know, written in a certain different way, it might come across as more of a sort of a, yeah, not a great moment, but it was, you know, James Brolin drags her down. Gurney Halleck drags her down and says, you know,
nothing in the text in the original novel, but I was like, oh, this is interesting. I would like to see these two kind of, and I suspect there'll be more of that in part 3.
Yeah.
At least I hope so. Don't set that up, because that's another thing I find irritating is it's like, I feel it's like, oh, that's setting up for the next movie. It's not for our benefit now. That is strictly, hey, I've put that there so that when I use it in another movie, it's like, oh my goodness, this is a Chekhov's gun. Chekhov didn't say use in third movie, use in your fourth book. It's like, save that for the sequel.
Chekhov's lethal weapon nail gun. Hey, do we have any nails for this gun? Oh, the shipment just came in.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't play a role later.
Maybe the next movie.
Yeah, exactly.
But this is the thing. So is the story changing that much? You know, does she become Paul's enemy? Is that what they're setting up here?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and
Good
again,
question.
it's like, well, that's not. What is Paul then? You know what? Because you can't. Even his whole revenge thing, like early in the movie, he says, "Well, I believe in revenge," and whereas his mother. Remember the schemer, like there's a lot of contradictory, and I don't mean it in a good way, a lot of contradictory messages and signals from some of these characters. Well, your father didn't believe in that. Well, I do. And then later on, but then all of a sudden, he's not talking revenge at all. And then all of a sudden, he's vengeful. And it's like, and this is, these characters are either comically one note, and I'd say Lady Jessica is comically one note for most of the movie. You know, the scheming Bene Gesserit, the weird mother of the baby that never gets birthed, the mother-in-law, you know, but she doesn't. And I was thinking about another movie almost, or maybe even longer, Lawrence of Arabia, where all those characters, except for him, you know, maybe Omar Sharif's character, you know, you could almost say is the bro love, or, you know, some people when they've interpreted that as a, you know, a homoerotic relationship, Omar Sharif's character with Peter O'Toole's character, but he has an arc to a degree within those films, but Lawrence drives that bus completely. Everyone else is kind of one note, but they all feel real. They all feel like they have they don't have any arc, but they feel like real people. Whereas here, some of these folks, it's like, I'm having a hard time believing you. You know what? If you want to keep Jessica a one note, kind of villain, well, pick something. Is she a villain? Does she become a villain? Is she the protective mother who fears her? I don't know. Like, I think there are a number of characters like this. Stilgar, every character except, and this is why I come back to Chani, every character in this film seems less, except for her and Baron Harkonnen. Otherwise it's like, they're not. Yeah, if you didn't have Stilgar in this flick, would you have noticed? I mean, Javier Bardem's a remarkable player, but did he actually have enough to do? Was he enough of his own man?
I think he was the voice of faith, for instance, for him. And I think he was the one character that was able to bring some humor to the proceedings. It's not a big, chuckle fest or anything like that, but he, gave it some shading, I thought, and some much needed relief, but, and was able to sort of, he was kind of the conduit between Paul and the rest of them, and he would say, just do, so I think he did have a role. Now, are you?
I would agree with you. I think it's a lot less.
You think so? Yeah,
it could have been. Like,
yeah. I mean,
and a character who should have had an arc.
Yeah,
he becomes too trusting and too hooked into the prophecy of the Lizanel Gabe too quickly, and almost in a way overnight.
Well, I think it's kind
almost
of established
strictly to show a contrast to Chani and her nationalist friends.
Yeah. I think one aspect of the Stilgar character is that he wanted it so badly that he was all in once he saw the first few signs. I mean, they even sort of joke about it a little bit.
But it makes and that's like the thing, though. I think that character makes it less, but they had to make him less to make Chani more. And Jessica has to be more of a villain, so Chani can be, and it's like, I'm not sure this makes for a good movie. Let's talk about another epic romance, the Titanic. Another long, and although Billy Zane ain't Stellan Skarsgård. Although I want to walk that back a little bit, Jim. That may be unfair to Billy Zane, like I could act a quarter as well as he is, as he does. And we don't know how Cameron directed him and everything. But probably the only cartoony character in that movie. Everyone, even if the mother's kind of a nasty piece of work, and also a whole bunch of one-note characters, including the lover, she's really the only one with an arc on the Titanic.
Mm.
And yet, they all seem full and real. Again, I think those weird switches that, he's the cynical, I don't know about you outsiders, to, I believe in him. Well, it makes him less. He's not critical anymore. And this is a guy who leads people, and he's just, you kids don't understand. I heard 3 things I wanted to hear.
Yeah. And I wonder if some of that is just
also to exploit a Westerner's idea of fundamentalists, especially when we put them in brown skin.
Yeah.
It's like,
that was very that was very
sakes.
They talked about them more than they showed them. They kept on saying the word fundamentalist, and I thought, they're going to set it up. They're going to set up a big meeting between him and the leaders of the South or something to that effect.
Yeah. So that we are with Zendaya.
Yeah.
Like, again, it's that making less. And here's one thing. Now, I've revisited Dune more than once. So one of the things, though, I really appreciate about Herbert's writing, especially about the Fremen, which is why Atreides, not just the mother, exploiting them as weak fools, but that they really are a curse, this outlier, are a curse on these people, is that Herbert, I suspect he was an atheist, he very anthropological in his approach and sociological in his approach as he describes this bigger world and these people specifically. That said, he seemed to really respect them, and in a way, a lot of people he researched, indigenous folks of the Pacific Northwest of the United States. You can certainly see a lot of references to Bedouin. Yeah. A Bedouin worldview and a Bedouin life. Although it may have had more to do with, never mind the Bedouins, but the people of the Arabian Peninsula. But, you have all these things going on here, but fundamentally, Herbert really had respect for them. And so in the book, what you find are the Fremen, they're vulnerable to they were only vulnerable. It's a hole in their swing, let's say. It's a vulnerability they have, not because they're bumpkins who, are suckers for superstition, but that they were so finely attuned to their environment, because that book has a lot of themes about the environment that you don't really see in this movie and in the previous movie, and I doubt we'll see it in the third movie. It's almost it's hot here. Whereas in the book, it really tries to draw that this culture is totally perfectly calibrated to this environment. And the Atreides from the get-go want to exploit it. The Duke did. Desert power. They saw it as we were given this fief, and we will be nice to the chattel, the attached peasants of this thing the Emperor gave us, but it's the same thing. It's the Harkonnens, but nicer. And by doing what Villeneuve did, you don't get that feeling at all. I don't think he respects them, except that they're good fighters.
Yeah,
like,
I think part of the thing here is and I may be off base with this a bit, but you may be able to get a lot more complexity out of a book. And, if you remember, Dune was super long. It was the version we had was on that, not quite that onion skin that they have in Bibles, but it was and it was very dense. It was almost like the game
was called cheap.
Yeah, well, it seemed to be a different quality paper. I thought I might have one right here behind me in this mess, but it was a thick book, and I think when you're talking about cinema, you can often, and you probably don't, and I wouldn't take the time to do it, but it's almost like sentence diagramming, if you remember that. It's almost like temporal diagramming. You don't have a lot of maybe enough time to get into things. And I'm not making excuses for it. I just think that there's a level of complexity that you don't necessarily have that you do in writing. And I'll offer you this example. In Lord of the Rings, the first movie, Boromir's a bit of a bitch. Like, he's kind of whining and he's got concerns, and he's it's not that he's a bad man, but he's sort of hasty and he's given over to his temper, and he's just not so much of a team player, perhaps. In the extended version, there's one scene one scene where he's training the hobbits to fight and to use weaponry and that kind of thing. And that one scene, and it's about a minute long, completely humanizes him. Like it changes the tone. And this might be the work of the actors or whatever. It's brief, but it's not like a fast edit. And it completely changes your sort of understanding and appreciation of Boromir, which is the character that he played, Sean Bean. And it makes his ultimate, spoiler alert, death a lot more tragic. Because he was on side, he was on board, but that earlier cut, the theatrical cut, made it seem like he was kind of the cranky guy of the group, and he wasn't really along for the ride, and that. So I think if we were given some sort of extended cut, which we're still waiting for the Napoleon,
this Napoleon 2 hour and 2 3/4 hour movie needs.
Well,
more.
Same thing, but that same thing with Lord of the Rings. The theatrical release was just under 3 hours, and the extras were another 20 minutes, I think. So it came out to about 320. But even that little scene changed totally your appreciation for Boromir, or at least mine for Boromir.
I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to push back on two levels. One, the book's a thick book, but we've had over 5 hours of film now.
Mm-hmm.
For this big, thick book. And I go to Lawrence of Arabia, which, although not a perfect film and a big, long movie, but manages to capture quite a bit of the nuance of the struggle of the Arabs for independence, the machinations between let's call it already an empire that still looked big, but was shrinking. Their arrogance, the way they screw him at the end, even Lawrence's, he's got all these high-minded ideals and he wants to be an adventurer and he's looking for glory, but he respects these people and he's so noble. And then after a while, it's like, oh, he really likes killing. It's on the one hand, he went, he's gone, but really what he's gone is killer, and all these promises he's made amount to nothing. Even as Alec Guinness is a great King Fouad or King Saud? King Fouad? Arabia.
It's been a while.
In some great Western filmmaking whitewashing. But at least he's like, I always knew you guys were going to screw us. You were naive. That he grows up and he's less. And it's this great moment. And in the end, he just dies in a crappy motorcycle accident. Sorry, everyone. Spoilers.
Yeah. Don't read the Wikipedia page.
And that's all covered in one movie. And that was a war over several years.
Yeah, I mean, you make your choices. I mean, a couple of things is that you especially when doing, so the nice thing about movies based on books is that they're interpretations. And they're also a little bit of a sort of a different kind of a product as well. But when Peter Jackson did Lord of the Rings, it was like, besides the 70s half-finished animation movie that we had in back in the day.
Early late 70s rotoscoping.
Yeah.
Is it Don Bluth? Don Bluth's
no.
I'll look it up. You continue.
But you have that, and then you have an interpretation necessarily, because it's not going to come out the same as the book does, obviously. So here you have David Lynch, and then you have that series from about 20 years ago, and now you have Denis Villeneuve's version. You have to make choices, and also I have to think there's massive, as we've come to appreciate, studio interference on virtually every level.
Ralph Bakshi's version.
Bakshi, But you have studio interference on almost every level of every movie. And it's the old story that's amazing that anything gets made. But you know, I so I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the movie's not as nuanced as it maybe could be, or as the books are necessarily. But yeah, I'd be sort of interested to be a fly on the wall in some of those
Well,
meetings there. It's a big thing that they want to have. It's a big production, expensive production that they want to have a big hit out of. So
yeah.
I don't know what interference he ran into along the way, but
Yeah.
those things.
And that's something you and I have talked about before. Although I got to admit, I kind of tilting on this one. I know I was being facetious when we went into the theater. I'm like, is everyone saying it's great just because it's Denis Villeneuve? And
Oh, that's a danger.
everyone's saying it's great, so therefore it must be great. So everyone comes out going, boy, this is great.
Yeah. Show your work.
Well, I mean, I got to admit, Jim, I'm still like, it's still above average. Not even as much above average as I thought the other night. Like, it's my feelings on this are coming back to the mean, let's say.
Sure.
And who knows, some of the things we've talked about, I could see where the story could go in what will be the third act. And we could really see that Villeneuve has always had his eye on the tragic ball. And all will come for naught, as it should, for, an Oedipus-esque or a Hamlet-esque player like Paul Atreides. Or even the King and the Green Knight, the young man who goes and comes back and conquers and still dies. Dies a death of violence. But as far as adaptations go, I'm wondering if some of it is that need to satisfy the me's of the world. If you look at, now mind you, I got to admit though, at times I'm like, oh, you could have saved half an hour. You managed to drag something out into multiple scenes that could have been dealt with in one scene. And you would have had a lot of time to do a lot of other stuff, spending time with these characters in a different way to show us different aspects of them. Or I don't know. There's things that could have been done here that even the book Herbert went, oh, I can kill that in a scene. I don't need to spend the next 4 chapters on that. I can do it in one. But that said, then, if you're going to do an adaptation, go full Kubrick. You could almost argue that The Shining is hated by the writer, but wow, now that was an adaptation. Almost like, yes, I am inspired by this book. Now I'll make my movie.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And sort of, I'm on more on Kubrick's side with that one. It's just that,
how could you not be?
Why would, the whole carbon copy thing is kind of,
well, and this is maybe my biggest beef. It's not like Villeneuve has taken the bull by the horns. I'm going to make my movie. I think he's like, well, I'm going to make the fans happy, but I'm also going to put my interpretation. And the studio says, hey, Zendaya needs more time because she looks so great on camera. And. Well, that becomes, I think, what this is. 2 hours and 45 minutes of, well, above average. Here's your B-, C+. Because I got to admit, I think of Avatar, Jim. Not Avatar 2, but the original Avatar. That was a tighter movie.
Yeah.
But the only reason people started talking about it again was that there was plans for Avatar 2. Do you think in 10 years especially if there's no Dune 3, or let's say there's a Dune 3. Actually, you know what? Let's say there's no Dune 3.
Okay.
Do you think in 10 years we'll still be talking about this movie? Like some of the other films we've mentioned, The Shining,
Yeah,
Lawrence of Arabia, Lord of the Rings.
I don't know if it's,
or is this more like The Hobbit?
yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't, I don't think it's sort of David Lean territory necessarily, but I think it'll be talked about. The thing that keeps coming back to me is the cinematic experience. And it was quite a cinematic experience. There was a lot of the pieces that had to delivered. So the first ride on the sandworm.
Yeah.
The first
Stuff
the
that
big
film is so good at.
Yeah, the big battle at the end, the speech that he gives using a fake language is pretty moving, in terms of fake language speeches that I've seen that Paul gives. And
Are you
even
talking
the first
about when he's challenging the community? When
he's
saying,
talking to
"Listen,
everyone, and he's sort of
the big
the one
bad
that sort of
now
pushes it over the edge.
It's my rules.
Yeah. And the other thing, it starts off with them trying to take down a spice mining machine, and that's an exciting sequence and very well filmed. And I think in terms of the cinematic experience, let's not forget that that's why people aren't watching it right now on home video. They're watching it in the theater. That I think that's, and to the tune of 90 million, I think, bucks this weekend. I think that's only going to grow. But I think that's what the takeaway from this, and I think people are really inspired by that cinematic experience initially, which makes the move to streaming so kind of tragic. But this one with the sound and the sort of the visuals and that sort of thing,
it certainly is. It's no Napoleon.
Yeah, no.
It maintained my engagement for the most part.
Yeah,
there were some times I'm like, oh, this is. Oh, wait, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty engaged through it all, and then I think they delivered. A lot of times these set pieces, they're where it's heading, right? He's got to ride the worm, and he's got to, he's going to fight with Fade Rotha, and you're just like, I wonder if they're gonna. And then I think they all delivered all the points that they hit.
That raises another question. Is some of my actually one of the biggest challenges for anyone, and I am not trying to say this is bad.
Mm-hmm.
Making a movie is hard. Making a big ass movie like this, an order of magnitude harder.
Yeah.
Keeping all these stars, managing them, getting the best you can out of them, all that stuff. Hard. Mm-hmm. Villeneuve has demonstrated through some truly great and movies that stick with me now. I'm thinking Sicario. We covered it last December. December 6th. Polytechnic, thank you. Demonstrated an ability to, just to tell a story in film, which is different than, let me tell you what happened last week. That said, there is a challenge when something's already been done in film. Multiple times, actually, because there was that sci-fi miniseries that was made.
Mm-hmm.
Did
you see it?
15,
I haven't seen it myself.
Yeah. I have.
Okay.
The books, the multiple books, the 84 movie, which, I'll pin here somewhere. You and I, that did not hold up.
No. The Navigators were cool, but
it has that extra weight. You know, just that other stuff that it's taking on. It's kind of like a thing I'm developing for a short. I'll eventually get out the door. But this idea of, let's say, Star Wars, the first one, there's a film that travels carry on. It's super light, it's light on its feet, but because it doesn't have any expectations. You come to these later sequels, woof. Woof, everyone. But part of that is just that weight of expectations. They are no longer traveling carry-on. It's not just a shoulder bag and off I go.
Yeah.
To adventures. I'll book a hotel when I get there. It is, no, we're going to go to this resort. We're going to have this food. I've already ordered half of it and a ton of checked baggage. Why are you carrying that? You know, you can buy that there. Oh, I don't know. Spend half their time in the fucking airport. And I think that's part of this film's problem. There's a lot of stuff it drags into the theater with it. Anyway.
Yeah.
Jim, before we get into final thoughts, I could ramble on about this film more. I kind of like to. But, I mean, well, first of all, did you have anything, Jim, did you have anything to ask of our good friend, Luke Skywalker?
Yeah. What did you think of it, Luke? Or actually, I should make it a more complicated question.
Well, it's too bad now. The question was answered.
Sorry. Was caught off guard.
Great way to halfway through the gag to go, oh, wait. I'll be cutting that out, folks. Okay.
Well, take care of it in post.
We are going to start a new thing, though, now. Jim, do you have a question or two for Denis Villeneuve?
Yeah.
What is your first question? If you could ask Denis Villeneuve 2 questions, what is your first question?
I wanted to know how the David Lynch, or if the David Lynch version informed his version at all, and if so, what? What did he take from that, or what did he avoid because of that?
Okay, great question. Let me just see. My first question, Jim, would be, why focus on the love story? What was the thinking there as they were developing the story? Him and the screenwriters he was working with, I want to know why he kind of shifted it and invested so much in the love story. What was the thinking there? What was he hoping to draw out in that love story, in that romance? Tragic, it should be. that he changed the direction that way, or changed the way he wanted to tell the tale. That's my question there. All right, Mr. Chaboyko, what's your next question for Mr. Denis Villeneuve, the writer-director of Dune 2?
Well, I suspect he may be lowballing the trilogy thing. I'm wondering if he really expects it just to end at 3. Maybe take it a little bit further. What is and this would be just between him and me, how many movies is he really expecting out of this? All things being equal, best case scenario.
Okay, well, that's a great question, Jim. If I can piggyback on that, Jim, I recommend only 3. Just
have it like Saturday afternoon serials. Just keep going, do it like number 37, number 38.
For the love of God, could you just say,
wrap it up?
I've told our tale. Move along now. Go make up some other story for weeks.
Paul died 3 movies ago.
All right. For me, Jim, my next question, how did I get it here? All right. Oh, yes. And this is something I wanted to ask you, and anyone who stumbles across this in the replay, feel free to comment down. Were you, Mr. Villeneuve, making an allegory here or an analogy? You know, especially around the politics, the internal politics of the Fremen. You know, is this allegorical? Are you drawing on specific our world examples, or is it more an analogy, or is it a bit of both? That, Jim, is what I would like to know. So there's our first. I'll be editing these, putting them up on social media, and see if we can't bait Mr. Villeneuve.
Sure.
Or perhaps the internet goes, well, he answered all those questions in this interview, losers.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that too.
I wonder if Jelly Duck has any questions for Denis Villeneuve there.
Oh, is Jelly Duck? Jelly Duck is in the house.
With us, yes. Hello, man.
Oh, my goodness. Jelly Duck!
And he caught the Funko Pop action there, so that's
Jelly Duck, do you have a question for Luke? What's your question for Luke, Jelly Duck?
Anything? Oh, we should ask Jelly Duck. Does this closely resemble life in a sandy environment?
I got to admit, and I mean, Kuwait is far from Egypt, but when they talked about Jim, when they talked about it being in the south, you know, the fundamentalists in the south, that resembles in a grossly oversimplistic way the Muslim politics of, or some of the Muslim politics of Egypt. You know, the Cairo, the metropolitan, the cosmopolitan north, you know, connected to, you know, the Mediterranean, closer connected to the Mediterranean. Whereas you go down south, Aswan, that area, a lot more, a lot more religiosity. You know? Yeah. All right. I think we do have a question. Oh, ask him if he ask him if he was a father. Well, you know what? Let's, Jim, I think that's a great question.
Yes.
Yeah. Ask him if he's a father. Just a sec here. All right. Randomizer. What do we got?
I have a very bad feeling about this.
Apparently, Jim, Luke has a very bad feeling about that.
I imagine. Jelly Duck did better than me at the Luke cutaway too. So,
thank you very much, Jelly Duck 100. Appreciate you popping in. I would love to. Oh, who's this? Jesse and Ebony. 5 movies to include the children. Oh, we do another commenter in.
Oh, hello.
Jesse and Ebony, 5 movies. So correct me if I'm wrong. So what you're looking for is to make sure that Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and God Emperor of Dune are covered, or just the Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. It would be interesting to know. But thanks for chiming in on that.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, and of course, because we've got a couple of folks in the chat, one more shameless plug for a like, a subscribe, and let's ring that bell together, Jim.
There we go. We have practical effects, Jesse and Ebony. Like John Wick in here.
Hey, you know what? Let's... Jesse and Ebony!
Woo. I don't have an air horn.
There you go.
There we go.
thinking up to Children of Dune. So, yeah, which I think would be the logical kind of wrap up of Paul Atreides' total. Like, I think for all intents and purposes, he is done as a major narrative force at the end of Dune Messiah, but it's really Children of Dune that, his second son takes over. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Jim, I think it is time to get into final thoughts.
Sure.
What else would you like to add?
Well, there's three things. Number one, they refer to kangaroo mice. So I'm wondering, interesting that kangaroo has made the leap to Dune. I would say that, first of all,
if it's because it's such a cool word.
Yeah, that's true. When Florence Pugh said it, I was like, well, it's like, I think they mentioned sandwich in Star Wars or something like that. And I'm like, what? But a little bit of appreciation for Frank Herbert. He, like many years ago, and there's still like, this book that I don't even know what year it came out. And this 2024, March of 2024, millions of people are going to see it still. I mean, it's still having an effect. I don't know if you've ever read anything else by him, but I remember being really taken by the White Plague. Yeah. And so much so that when I went to Europe as a younger man with more hair, I was in Dublin because a lot of that takes place.
No matter how much you ate.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. But I remember going to scenes in the book because a lot of it sort of unravels in Dublin. So I remember being I think it's St. Stephen's Green, and going to those places, you're there anyway, but thinking, oh, this is where White Plague sort of, I think it's where the antagonist places the first few pellets or whatever he does to poison the population. The other thing too, I want to say is I just realized it as we were talking here. And one of the things that I hate is when they try to make a ballsy decision in movies, and usually it involves some sort of death. It's Peter Parker chasing the guy who shot Uncle Ben, and the guy falling to his death or something, in earlier iterations. And it's nothing that Peter Parker did, because the hero can't do that kind of thing. And again, guys, spoiler alert if you missed the spoiler alert earlier. In this one, he just walks up to and kills Harkonnen. It's none of this, the Baron. It's none of this sort of like apologetic. Harkonnen doesn't trip down the stairs. He just goes up and he says, in a really sweet moment, "Hi, grandfather," and then stab.
So that was and in the first movie, way better death for him, and a way better ending scene. Where he's kind of reduced, and no, I agree with you. For me, Jim, I'm going to talk about the cinematography. I agree with you 95% of it, but I got to admit, the IMAX, that tall frame, if you're too close, and there's a great moment where Jessica is talking to her belly, and there are some of the weak, easy to manipulate. Oh my goodness. I'll never get over that. I think that's a huge knock on this film. That kind of anti-religiosity, that anti-faith, it's not, I'm no believer, and I'm like I'm insulted on behalf of these folks. Anyway, there's that. But part of the problem is because it's such a close scene and it's so tall, I feel like I'm watching a big television. I get why it's IMAX, and I get why that's such a big thing. But I got to admit, I'm like, there are some where it's like, did we need that? The very opening scene, Jen, is another one where it's like, oh, I could just walk out on those sands, but I still feel like I'm watching big television, like, because it's everything's a little too close, like it's too close. And that may have been part of the problem I had with the final scene, the key final scene of the first movie. It just loses some impact. It's not wide enough. Whereas, you know what? You think about Omar Sharif coming up to that well and how long it takes and the tension that's built and how far everything seems. And all of a sudden you're close and the guide, because he's part of the wrong tribe and he gets shot. Again, spoiler alerts, folks. For a movie that came out in the 60s. That just feels, even then, when it's close, it feels like it should be close. I don't feel like I'm watching TV. When it's big and wide, it feels big and wide. That would be, there's my quibble about IMAX cinematography.
You should, it's a super complicated process. There was an article online on how Greg Fraser, I believe, is the cinematographer. And yeah, it's like, I sort of don't get it, but it's kind of an interesting process. But anyway, yeah.
Well, but that's the thing. It's like, you know what? Overcomplicating something, and then I think, what?
A tech guy overcomplicating something? Sorry, go ahead. You think?
I do. Even if he sticks the landing on this one, I'll still look at this trilogy as one of those things where it's like, well, that was pretty good. Missed opportunity. Because I've referred to a number of films that managed to do it better, that managed to either give a long time and you feel like you're in a long adventure. Like, this is one of those ones where, much like that IMAX thing, I think time-wise, it's still under 9 months. It's almost like an action. It's a weird sort of more action than adventure. And it's like, you have all the money and all the screen time. Why not have it over a few years? You've got that time. You can do that. Alia, the little sister, should have been born. We should have seen that. That should have happened. We could have taken more in-universe, in-film time to tell this story, especially since they got so much of it. Yeah. Why not make more Lawrence of Arabia? Because, let's say, go to the other extreme, it was only, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks tops for the Titanic, and an epic 3-ish hours. I feel like they're telling multiple stories. Whereas here, it's, I don't know, everything just seemed less sort of off kilter, right? So too tall and too short. And yeah, I think this is an above average film, but not a great film. 10 years from now, especially if there's no Dune 3, you'll be talking about it in it was better than the first one. Hey, that did get made. Oh, well. We got another. Jesse and Ebony chime in with average audience attention span equals money. Oh yeah, the studio dialed in the math. But you know what? It takes the same amount of effort to make an average movie as it does to make an amazing movie. Make an amazing movie. I think I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth there. But heck, you know what? It's my money. I get to demand amazing. And when I don't,
I think we should
discount it.
I think we should just compare every movie to Lawrence of Arabia. What was better, Dude, Where's My Car, or Lawrence of Arabia?
Well, I think Lawrence of Arabia and Titanic being an epic romance, like both two big epic movies, one more political and tragic, Whereas another one, I wouldn't call that a tragic romance. It ends on such an up note. And yeah, both chef's kiss epic movies that took their time, but achieved everything. Whereas this, same thing, I don't think it's achieved that level. You know, it's not, it's above average, but it's not a great film. Jelly Duck 100. I was thinking about, I need to watch Dune 1984. I know the trailer looks interesting. Oh, Jelly Duck. You know what? I don't know. What do you think, Jim? We felt it didn't hold up. That said,
Funny, I just watched the trailer just before we got on, and it's, you know, it's a little bit, you know, it's got its own qualities. It's a little bit dated. The navigators are super weird and cool though, and it's kind of neat to see Patrick Stewart as Gurney. You know, again, it's a different interpretation, and you have different actors interpreting different roles, so it's, you know, it's never a waste of time to watch something like that. It's just yeah, don't go in expecting you know, something amazing, but it's an interesting exercise to watch the old one.
You know what, Jelly Duck, I wish I could find it here. There is like a fan edit of the first movie. I can't remember. You're gonna have to do some Googling. But there's a fan edit of the first movie, and I was on Twitter. Somebody was going, you know, I watched that recently and I like it better. Not better than Dune 2, but better than the original Lynch's outing. But Lynch, you know, yeah, a ton of studio interference.
Oh, yeah.
You know, all right. Folks, thank you all very much for coming out. Well, once again, thank you, Jelly Duck. Thank you, Jesse and Ebony. Appreciate you chiming in on the chat. And
nice meeting you.
Would love to, for those who watch it on replay, would love to hear more of what you have to say. You know, of course, please like and subscribe. Please share with friends. And somewhere, whoops, over here, YouTube will tell you what else you should watch. All right, everyone.